Kia ora whānau, how's it going? Hey, welcome back to Kaitiaki Mara Kai, backyard garden. And today I just thought I'd do a bit of an update on where our Mara Kai is in my backyard, but also have a talk around the kaupapa of Korekore te Whiwhia, which is a day within the Māra where you prepare your tools and also you think about planning out what's coming up for the summer or the season that you're going into. So yeah, te Korekore te Whiwhia is the kaupapa for today under our Kaitiaki Mara Kai program, looking at preparation and preparing things for the tools. So we're going to look at preparing, what I've done so far, yeah, just give you some jungle tips and hints around what I've done, what I've learned. If you like this, if you find this helpful, please subscribe or pass it on to someone else. Share it around. We're here to help each other, build some resilience. So yeah, Korekore te Whiwhia, preparing tools and planning your garden. So here's our backyard. As you would have seen last time, I had dug this garden bed here, and so I've started to, in the top end over here, I've got corn, and I've got some tomatoes along here, and then I've put some covering in order to try to keep the moisture in the soil, and in particular as it gets warmer here in Te Tai Tokorau and Pukekohe over the summer period, the heat's going to suck up the water pretty quickly. So I'm using this pea straw as both a weed restrictor, so it'll stop the weeds. Obviously I have to do along the fence there, but it also allows the moisture to stay in the soil a bit longer. Yeah, high water in the evening or first thing in the morning. So that's one there. I'm going to put some herbs along the front there that go with the tomatoes, and I'm getting this part here ready for the next phase. And then over in our bigger garden, you see what I've done a little bit more here. That mound at the back there, I put in 10 potatoes. You'll see a sign there, and so the seed will go through there. Got some broccoli, silver beet and cabbage, and then along here I've got my tomatoes. I'll come around from this way. So this is really just a little update on the Māra. And again, pea straw. I've also got some mulching bark. Again, it's used to help suppress the weeds, and I'm using this in my path, just my pathway, so I can walk. But you got little leaves in here, weeds in here. You just go in and pick them out. But it helps suppresses it, and if I look underneath, you might see it's still a little bit moisture in there. See how it's a little bit damper than say over here, whereas that's that's dried out. So it helps keeps the moisture in the soil, and it means it doesn't evaporate as quick. Yeah, so I did a bit of weeding yesterday along these parts because I'm preparing to put some kumara at the back, full along around the back there. I'm going to probably lay some carrots in here, and then I'll get some more vegetables down here. And progressively I'll work through. So this is where we're at the moment on our backyard garden. So I'm going to talk about this today, what I've done. I'm doing pea straw or mulching bark to suppress the moisture evaporation, to suppress the weeds, but also to help the moisture when I water it to stay into the soil, so it doesn't evaporate as much. And it also means that as it breaks down, it adds nutrients back into the soil, which is always a good thing as well. So yeah, this is the first phase of my planning, and I'll talk about this soon. So got a little bit going over there, and we've got these ones here. Tomatoes are coming along well, so I'm going to need to tie these up soon. So obviously there's tomatoes coming through there. I learned a trick just this week. You've got these little shoots in here, these runners. I've heard that you can actually pull them off once they're a little bit longer and mature, and then plant them down, and they'll grow from. So then you actually sequence out the times of your tomatoes, so they don't all come at once. It means that as this matures and harvested, the next one will come up and so forth. So that's why I've got variations of ages of tomatoes in my plot. So in part 3, I talked about preparing the soil, and how when you're doing your Korekore te Whiwhia, your planning and preparation, your soil is really the foundation to the whole success in your gardens. And so you need to think about what are your conditions that you've got, how healthy is your soil, have you got good nutrients in that, and is it full of clay, how accessible do you have water and things like that. So today's really just talking around some of those things that I've picked up and just wanting to share with our whānau. And having come out of the military, we use 5 Ps. Prior preparation prevents poor performance. I'll put a 5th one in there. Some of my soldier buddies will use the Mimi word as a P, but in my situation, for this context, we're going to use the word planning. So prior preparation prevents poor performance, planning, and that's what we're talking about today. So as part of the planning, I've got a couple of W's and a couple of H's, you know, the W and H's scenario. Firstly, what do you have? Planning for a garden, you have to decide what do you have as a resource around you. Do you have resources in a way where you're going to be sustainable? So for example, do you have enough land? Do you have a plot? Is it diggable? Do you have gardening tools? Do you have access to seedlings or seeds and so forth? Last time I spoke about how you might get some seedlings or how you might get some seeds to sow. In one of the shots we've got here is I've got some parsley, and you would have seen that one of the parsley shoots is starting to seed. And I'm going to actually let that seed, and then I'll take them and dry them out and store them up for next year, and then I've got my own seeds for the parsley. One of the key things around your resources is both in regards to physical resources of land, but then also your own mātauranga, your own understanding of what's needed to do a garden, because it can be quite a labour intensive job. So who are your networks, who you link up with, who can help you, where can you get resources and things like that are some of the things you need to think about as part of your planning. The second what is what do you want out of your garden? Are you trying to just feed the whānau, Are you trying to grow in an understanding of different kai you want to grow in that? Whether it's corn, potatoes, tomatoes, peas, bok choy, or whatever else you're wanting to grow. Yeah, what are you wanting to get out of it? What's your dream about it? I met up with someone just this weekend. They just wanting to be sustainable for their own whānau. A mum with 5 kids, and so there's this idea of, hey, I actually just need to get out and be able to do it myself, but I just don't know where to start, and so we are free on that process. How will you maintain your garden? Now, this is where I think you need to consider, with the level of skill you've got, what size you're wanting in your garden. It's no use having a big, huge garden and what you have in regards to resources is very limited. In my beekeeping time, so one of the things that we talk about in regards to nurturing hives is you don't want to demoralize the bees. So if you overstimulate the bees, if you have too much space in your hive, this can kind of paralyze the bees until actually they don't do anything, they don't become productive. So you've got to try to find that balance between the size of the hive is suitable for the amount of bees that are in there, and it's the same for us when we're doing our garden. What's the size that you're doing? The size may also be determined by your access to water. Up here in the north, the water issues is a big one. On our papakainga, we're on tank water, so I have to think about in my planning what do I want to grow, and then what's the effect of its water usage. So for example, tomatoes, to get a nice plump tomatoes, there's some research that says it takes around about 13 kilograms of water per tomato. So that's that if you're on a place where you've got water shortages or on tank, that's a lot of water that you're trying to produce the fruit of the tomato. So in the planning aspects in regards to the size of your plot and water access, you have to think about how do I utilize water? How do I store water? Can I use my grey water to help feed your garden moving forward? And there are folk out there that know how to do all that type of stuff. You need to spend time in your garden. Once you get it going, you need to actually get out there and understand it, feel the rhythms, understand what creatures are walking around, the birds, the bees, animals. Try to keep your garden healthy, and what I mean by that is things like do weeding. So before I water my garden, I'll have a walk around, and I'll just pull out weeds that I see coming through. As I've already mentioned, the pea straw or mulching bark suppresses the weeds, so that helps in the journey. It also helps with relationship to water retention in the soil. As it gets warmer, the humidity and the sun will dry any water content. It'll suck it out. So having that kind of like a blanket over the whenua, you suppress the weeds and you keep the moisture in the soil a little bit longer. If you're in colder parts, it can help with the reverse. The blanket's like a blanket, and so it keeps the soil. It'll hold the heat in there from the day. So yeah, you think about putting something on top just to help aid you in that process. Yeah, just husbandry around that, looking after it. The next one is considering, how do I extend the harvest of the fruits and vegetables that you're wanting to grow? So this is where you think about what you're planting now and what you're putting in the soil and how you want to grow it. So for example, down here in the garden that's along my fence, which is that one there, I've got tomatoes and corn in a week's time I'm going to get some more corn and put it down here where I'm sitting, just down here, and allow that to grow. So I've then, what I'm doing now is then I'm thinking about my garden in regards to growing plots and sizable chunks where I have a type of vegetables, like the one in the back here. I've got broccoli, silver beet and lettuce. Now I planted those last week, and what I'll do this week and maybe into next week, I might plant something more in there, so like some more broccoli. And so that what I'm doing is I'm staggering out the time that the vegetable produces, rather than just planting a whole lot in the same time. I'm actually staggering out, and therefore I'm extending the timeline of my harvest, so that effectively I'm getting something each week, rather than all turning up in 1 week and then I've got no way of eating it all, other than maybe blanching it and freezing it, dry freezing it and so forth. So think about that. Think about your plot as a grid, and think of the top part of the grid as week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, or it might be week 1, 2 weeks later, 4 weeks later, 6 weeks later. It's depending on what you're wanting. So what that means is that when your fruit and vegetables in grid 1 come to fruition, 6 weeks later you're going to have fruit and vegetables of that same kai grow then. So it means that then you've got a 6-week window of a continual supply of fruit and vegetables. The other trick to that is also thinking about likes of spinach, for example. Spinach and silver beet, they tend to perpetually grow. So rather than cutting them all out and pulling them all straight out, what you might want to do there is consider about harvesting it from the perspective all you're doing is pulling off the outer leaves, like what you do with the harakeke. Pull the outer leaves off, and then you'll still see the new shoots coming up, the rito or the tuhua whenua growing up through the middle. So there are vegetables like that keep growing, so you don't necessarily, you might just put 2 or 3 down, because that will actually last you the whole time. On our papakainga, the spinach, silver beet lasted us the whole winter, so we had plenty, and I had enough that I was giving. I'd go and make a harvest, and I'd be giving it away on Sunday or during the week to other whānau, because we had plenty going there. Whereas other ones, it's just a one-off, and so those types of fruit and vegetables, once you pluck it, you've got to bring it and have another one later on. What are the effects of your local conditions? So I live here in Kaikohe, but our papakainga is over on Mātua block, and so the conditions are different to each other. So I have to learn, for example, over there we're on tank water, so I have to think about what the water situation is going to be like for me and what I grow there. So I tend to do things like I've got potatoes and kumara, so they might need water at this time of year, but as they come into the leaves growing and later in the season, they're not going to need as much water as they do at the start. Whereas all my leafy ones, they like to suck up the water, so yeah, I have to pick out the timings of that. So know your local conditions, your weather patterns. How do we get ourselves aligned to the rhythms of creation and the rhythms of the cycles of planting and harvesting, resting, because God's given us these things in our calendar that help us actually rest, help us to look after the soil, help us to look after our papatuanuka, new creation that He's given us. So those are some of the things that one needs to think about. Prior preparation prevents poor performance. So the prior part is you need to look up the soil. Preparing is you need to plan out what you want to do, plan out what you want, the size of it, what are your resources, how accessible do you have water, do you have water on tap, do you have to have storage, or is it tapuna, and you have to think about how you're going about it. Is it best to have a sprayer or a handheld hose or a drip feed? All those types of things you're going to need to do experimentation to think about what's the best way to utilize the resources that you have, because you could spray away at night with a hose like I do, and most of your water's going everywhere but on the garden, to say. Whereas some will lay down, they'll also have a drip feed of water continually goes, particularly in the hotter months. So you think about that. What other resources do you have? Do you have whānau networks? What's the size of the plot do you want? You don't want to overstimulate yourself or get discouraged because you've got more weeds than vegetables. And thinking about a gridding system on your garden, so that you can sequence out the harvest in a longer phase. Hoi ana whānau, I hope this is helpful. Please do subscribe and do like it if you appreciated this. I hope to put up some more